Okay, let's talk about where things are in the Mica Francis case. We have confirmed with multiple sources that the FBI's investigation into details surrounding Mica Francis's death is not only ongoing, but it is heating up. We have confirmed with sources that the FBI is asking people close to Mica to sit for multiple interviews, and they are asking questions about J.P. Miller's relationship with Mica leading up to her death. And they are asking for evidence such as text messages to back up claims being made about JP. While it appears the FBI is investigating Solid Rock Church and its allegedly questionable finances, for instance, their fundraising and spending related to their missions abroad, it is clear from our sources that the FBI is looking into much more than the potential financial crimes when it comes to JP Miller. Which is interesting to us because of how insistent law enforcement sources have been that this FBI investigation is not looking into Mica's death. Every time a law enforcement agency could say that to us, they did, including the FBI more than once. But looking into Mica's death isn't necessarily the same thing as looking into what led to Mica's death. And based on what sources have been telling us about who is being questioned and what they're being asked, it sure does seem like this is a case of semantics. How Mica died might not necessarily be in question, but why she died definitely seems to be on the FBI's table. Like we talked about with Laura Richards on this week's very important episode of Cup of Justice, coercive control is not a federal crime in the United States like it is in Canada and the UK. But that doesn't mean that JP immediately escapes all accountability. If investigators find that his behavior did in fact bring Mica to a breaking point before her death on April 27th. There is more than one way to peel a potato, as we have discussed many times on this podcast. There is a reason why Alec Murdaugh was charged with dozens of financial crimes before the murders. Police often use low-hanging fruit charges like financial crimes that have a clear paper trail to get witnesses and suspects to crack under pressure about the bigger crimes. While we are not accusing JP of any crimes on this podcast, to be clear, and we want to reiterate that he has not been charged in Mica's death, nor was he ever charged with abusing her, I think it is worth mentioning that there are laws in place that the federal government could use in their investigation. Laws that, according to our own research into the allegations being made against him by Mica's team, could apply here. For instance, there is a federal harassment law in the United States. Here is David with that.
18 U.S.C. 2261A says, whoever, 1, travels in interstate or foreign commerce or is present within the jurisdiction of the United States with the intent to kill, injure, harass, intimidate, or place under surveillance or intimidate another person, and in the course of or as a result of such travel or presence engages in conduct that A, places that person in reasonable fear of the death of or serious bodily injury to 1, that person, 2, an immediate family member, 3, a spouse or intimate partner of that person.
So, for example, it sounds like to us that if the FBI finds evidence on a man who used tracking devices on his estranged wife's car to stalk her as she crossed state lines because she felt so threatened and scared by his pattern of harassing behavior, that maybe that man could be charged with stalking by the U.S. Attorney's Office and face up to 5 years in federal prison, which is something. The other thing is a lot of this depends on the FBI agents, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and their willingness to think a little bit outside of the box when it comes to how these laws might apply. Because again, not all abuse is physical, and unfortunately, legislators have generally done the absolute minimum on that front, never mind addressing the idea that mental abuse can be just as, if not more, damaging. In Cup of Justice 83 with filmmaker Aaron Lee Carr, who directed and produced the HBO documentary I Love You Now Die about the Michelle Carter case in Massachusetts, we spoke about the case and how it became one of those outside-of-the-box situations for prosecutors. They had no clear state law to follow with her, because they believed it was her influence that ultimately led to her boyfriend, Conrad Roy, taking his own life, and there was no law that directly addressed that circumstance. They ended up charging Carter, who was a teenager at the time, with manslaughter, after police found text messages of her encouraging Roy to kill himself up until just moments before his death. The case was unique in the sense that it was the first of its kind. The idea that somebody could be convicted of manslaughter in a death that she did not directly have a hand in or was nowhere near when it occurred. The court found in that case that while Carter was not physically present at the scene, her verbal conduct, quote, overcame the victim's willpower to live and therefore caused the suicide. She was sentenced to 15 months in prison. While the Carter case was much different than this one in the sense that it did not include allegations of abuse and harassment, it was a landmark case that showed our courts can successfully prosecute for people's digital communications, not physical actions, when it comes to suicide. And by the way, I'm still not comfortable calling this case a suicide, and I'm not sure when I will reach that point. Everything I have learned about Mica and her life directly conflicts with what police say that she did on April 27th, 2024. A few weeks ago, when we were in Myrtle Beach, we retraced Mica's steps that day from her apartment to Dick's pawn shop, to a seemingly random gas station where she got an energy drink and more than half of a tank of gas, to Lumber River State Park, where she was found dead in the water. The trip was a chilling experience, and like most of my trips in investigative journalism, left me with more questions than answers. But it also left me with a strong feeling in my gut saying something is really wrong here. I don't know why she would have packed a sandwich to go on a trip to end her life. I don't know why she dressed for work that day, only to change her mind at the last minute and go to a pawn shop instead. I don't know how she apparently passed a background check so quickly from the same store that told us it takes from 15 minutes to several days to clear. And, according to the worker, if you were ever involuntarily committed, as her family says that she was, the feds will deny your application. I also don't know why she chose to go to a gas station completely out of the way of her route. I don't know why she chose this very random state park in a rough and rural area. I don't know why it took park rangers so long to locate her when the area she was in was not big, nor was it difficult to get to. I just don't know how this happened. And the more I think about her movements that day, the more I hope that her phone data is somewhere safe and secure and under serious examination. Who was she talking to that day? Did she tell anyone that she was feeling threatened? What really happened to Mica after she left her apartment in her work uniform with her lunch packed? All of it on its own is already hard to reconcile and to understand. But on top of that, we have Mica's estranged husband, J.P. Miller, making Mica's death a whole lot more complicated.